Don't kill my son. We didn't see a thing. Flowers for the dead, senor? No. Sit yourself then.
Lights!
I'm scared, Dad.
I know, Danny.
Hush, little baby, please don't cry. Hail Mary, full of grace.
You're wasting your breath, Angelito. There's nobody up there listening. Camera! Guess you on the wrong place, wrong time. Dump him. Judah's waiting.
I believe in a place where restless souls wander. Burdened by sadness, they can't enter heaven, so they wait. Trapped between our world and the next, searching for a way to end the pain. Hoping that somehow, someday, they'll be reunited with the ones they love.
You're wasting your breath, Angelito. There's nobody up there listening. Flowers for the dead, senor? No? Suit yourself then.
Welcome back to another Gaming Memories video. Here we are taking a look at The Crow, City of Angels. It's actually a game adaptation of the movie of the same name that was released back in the mid-90s. And this was released on the PlayStation in the early stages of roughly around 1996. And again, it kind of follows on from the premise of the actual film. So the concept of this game really is, it's actually more of a beat 'em up with exploration elements in it. But in order to proceed to the next area, you need to defeat all the enemies within the area before you can actually proceed. Again, it kind of is a throwback to the likes of old school type side scrolling video games, likes of Streets of Rage and Final Fight that were on the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo and so forth. Essentially this has the same premise. The only thing is it's done in more or less 3D type of environments with 3D characters. When I say in 3D, the backgrounds are actually pre-rendered backgrounds that are actually 2D photographic backgrounds, similar to what you would see in the likes of the early Resident Evil games and a lot of other games in this era, where you had to move to specific points and the camera would actually change depending on which area you were actually in. So essentially you would just get into confrontations with people and just keep fighting and beating them up until you could actually proceed. Now, it's an enjoyable enough title for what it is. Like, most movie game adaptations never really turn out that well. There's very, very few of them that never really hit greatness. This would be one of those games, unfortunately, would fall into the latter. Basically, it's grand for what it is. It's pick up and play. The only thing is I will say is, because of the quirkiness of the game, the likes of games like these here, yes, like the environments are decent and they do use pretty cool pre-rendered backgrounds. The only thing is the likes of the controls can be very, very clunky, because again, unlike stuff like shooting games, like where if you like so Resident Evil, where they use shooting mechanics, so the playability and the controls are usually spot on, even with the likes of tank controls. But when you try to use tank controls with the likes of a beat 'em up, when you're trying to actually fight, it can be very, very difficult, especially with these older like games, because again, the control systems back in those days were never as refined as they would be today. And the fact is, with the layout of the cameras and so forth, a lot of times it'd be very hard to pick up exactly which actual point you would be on the screen at any given time, so that you could actually engage with your enemies to actually hit them. So that caused a lot of difficulty and confusion. So it left that the learning curve of games like this here, and especially this here in particular, actually it would take a while to master. I will admit myself now, I actually after having a few goes at this, I did play it years ago. My first actually go of it was one of my mates actually had rented it out and he invited me around and we were playing it for a while. and could never really get very far on it because, again, just the control system, as you can see, it's very clunky, but you're also limited to only a select few moves. You only got about 4 or 5 moves, and you usually have to hold one of the buttons on the controller, and then you hit the direction button. It does put me in mind of games I've played before, the likes of Tank Commando and Perfect Weapon, where you had to use similar type of mechanics and controls in order to defeat enemies. Yes, after a while you can master them, but they still were very, very difficult. So they were. And this here is no different. Now, I remember one of my brothers, he actually was a fan of the movie, so I remember he actually got a loan of this here, and he actually enjoyed it. Now, he wasn't really that good at it like myself, but he still kept trying to play it anyway because he was just a big fan of the film and he just wanted to play it through it. We could get so far, but again, he just always kept dying. It wasn't until, like, say, in recent times when I started playing it again, it kind of made sense. I always find with a lot of those type of games, I may not understand it or really get that far the first time around I've played it because I don't really understand the mechanics or whatever. But I find with a lot of these older type games, I could come back to them, like, say, 6 months or even a couple of years later, and suddenly it just makes sense. And then you find that you can actually get very far in them. But I will admit, even by you see here by the combat mechanics, because you're limited to very few move sets, it can get very repetitive very quickly in terms of the combat. Yes, you'll be able to get the game to work depending on whatever camera angle that you're on, but it can be quite difficult. But it's not to say that it's a bad game. Games like this here are quite unique in what they do and what they offer. Now, they don't do games like this anymore really at all. I haven't seen games like this being developed for years now, but I can probably understand why, because the likes of with these type of environmental type games with pre-rendered backgrounds and 3D characters and trying to implement combat, especially with tank-like controls, it's not always the most feasible option, and it leaves a lot of questions because it can be very, very intimidating and quite difficult. But it's not to say that you can't enjoy it anyway. You can, if you stick with it and persist and have a bit of patience, you can definitely overcome a lot of the hurdles. But what usually happens is you overcome one hurdle, and in this case here, you'll put yourself into another, and then you get yourself killed then without even realising you've done anything wrong. You don't know what it is that you're actually doing. You're still trying to figure out the next thing to do. So it's just one of those things. But again, these games offered unique quirkiness to them, and that was the fun element of it. These games definitely, even though a lot of people may not have considered them that great, but there was always a unique kind of quirk or type of style to it, which always kind of stood out, and that's what I always remembered and what I loved about the PlayStation. That's why for me it's so unique, because even all the games like this here that probably wouldn't be as great as some other well-known titles, they always had their own individuality, and they always offered something different and brought something different to the table. And a lot of these games do kind of make it their own in some regards. But again, it's totally up to the individual, and if you're a fan of the Crow film, definitely feel free to check this out if it's something you think you might be into.
You must remain here forever.
So that's it for this video. Hopefully you found it enjoyable. If you have, make sure to leave a like on the video. Also hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon to be updated of future videos that I'll be releasing. And as always, until next time, make sure to keep exploring all those classic games and finding hidden gems. And until next time, make sure to keep those gaming memories alive.